I blew out the candle, but the room stayed dark. My wife stood by the door, her suitcase already packed. "Happy birthday," she whispered. "I'm leaving you for your brother. 30 years of life. 10 years of marriage." It all evaporated in the time it takes for a match to flicker out. I sat at the kitchen table, the smell of vanilla frosting suddenly making me want to gag. I could feel the sugar coating my tongue like a layer of poison. Sarah didn't look sad. She didn't look like a woman who was breaking a heart. She looked relieved, like she had finally shed a skin that was too tight. I looked at the suitcase. It wasn't the small carry-on she used for weekend trips. It was the heavy, industrial-sized trunk we bought for our honeymoon in Italy. She had been planning this for months. Every smile for the last 6 months had been a lie. Every "I love you" was a calculated move to keep me quiet until she was ready. "Does Mark know you're telling me tonight?" I asked. My voice sounded thin. It sounded like it belonged to a ghost. I didn't recognize the vibration in my own throat. "It was his idea," she said. That was the first real twist of the knife. My own brother Mark, the man I'd shared a room with for 18 years. The man I'd bailed out of jail when he got into that fight at 22. The man I lent $50,000 to start a business that he ran into the ground in 6 months. I defended him when our parents gave up on him. I called him my best friend. He didn't just want my wife. He wanted to ruin the one day of the year that was supposed to be mine. He wanted to claim my birth as the date of my destruction. "Why today, Sarah? Why my birthday?" I wanted her to say she was sorry. I wanted her to give me a reason I could understand. Maybe I worked too much. Maybe I was boring. Maybe I had failed her. But she didn't give me the mercy of a reason. She crossed her arms, her silhouette framed by the hallway light. "Because today is the day you realize you aren't the main character of this story. Elias, you're just the guy who pays the bills while the rest of us actually live. You're the safety net. But Mark is the sky." She walked out. No tears, no backward glance. Just the sharp rhythmic click of her heels on the hardwood floor. Each click sounded like a hammer hitting a nail into a coffin. I heard the roar of a car engine in the driveway. A familiar engine. Marcus' car. I sat in the dark for 3 hours. The cake sat in front of me, sweating in the heat. The happy birthday Elias icing began to bleed. The red letters running down the side of the cake like open veins. I didn't cry. That was the strange part. My body felt like it was made of stone. Instead, a cold, sharp clarity began to settle in my chest. It was a physical sensation, like drinking ice water on a freezing day. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen. I had a notification. A motion alert from the security camera. I'd hidden in our vacation cabin 3 weeks ago. I hadn't told Sarah about that camera. I told myself I installed it because of the burglaries in the area. But deep down, in that dark place where we keep the truths we're too afraid to say out loud, I knew. I had sensed the shift. The way she smelled like a different cologne. The way Mark stopped looking me in the eye. I opened the app. The video loaded. I saw them. Sarah and Mark, they weren't just leaving. They were headed there. To the cabin I built with my own hands. To the sanctuary I created for us. They were going to use my sanctuary as their playground. But as I watched the grainy footage of my brother, laughing and lifting my wife over the threshold, I felt a pulse of something other than grief. It was a cold, calculating hum in my brain. Sarah thought she knew me. She thought I was the boring guy who coded software and managed spreadsheets. She thought I was the safe choice. She never stopped to wonder why I was so good at managing complex systems. She never realized that a man who can build a digital world can also dismantle a physical one. I stood up, wiped a smear of frosting off the table, and grabbed my coat. My hands were perfectly steady. "You're right, Sarah," I whispered to the empty, dark kitchen. "I'm not the main character. I'm the architect." And I just decided to demolish the building. The engine of my car hummed a low, mournful tune as I pulled out of the driveway. I didn't look back at the house. A house is just wood, glass, and memories, and tonight, the memories were toxic. My destination was 2 hours, away, a secluded cabin tucked deep into the ribs of the mountain. It was the place where Sarah and I promised to grow old. Now it was the place where I would watch her world burn. As I drove, the city lights began to fade, replaced by the oppressive, suffocating blackness of the pine forest. This was the dead zone, where cell service flickered like a dying pulse. Sarah loved it here because she said it felt like the world couldn't find us. I realize now she loved it because it was the perfect place to hide a lie. I hit the steering wheel, not out of anger, but to feel something. My hands were cold. I started to remember the clues I had ignored. 6 months ago, Mark started showing up at our house unannounced. He'd bring expensive wine he couldn't afford. He'd sit on our sofa, leaning just a little too close to Sarah, while they laughed at jokes I didn't understand. I remembered Sarah's phone, lighting up at 3 o'clock. She told me it was a work emergency. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? I was the man who built a life on logic. And logically, your wife doesn't sleep with your brother. Logically, the people you love don't. Plot your social and financial execution while you're sleeping 3 feet away from them. But logic is a fragile thing when it's up against malice. I pulled over at a rest stop an hour into the drive. The air was biting, sharp enough to hurt my lungs. I took out my laptop and tethered it to my phone's weak signal. I am a senior systems architect. To Sarah, that meant I fixed the Wi-Fi. To the world, it means I understand how money moves in the digital age. I know where the ghosts of transactions live. I went straight for our joint savings. Sarah had moved $60,000 over the last few months. She was smart. She moved it in small increments, $2,000 here. $6,000 by there. She moved it to a private account held at a bank. I designed the security protocols for... She thought she was being clever. She thought she was winning the divorce before it even started. But she didn't realize that in my world, there is no such thing as a private account if you know the back door. I didn't take the money back. That would be too simple. Instead, I began to relabel the transfers. I modified the metadata of those transactions. To an outside observer specifically, a forensic accountant, it now looks like those. Funds were being funneled from a shell company in the Cayman Islands linked to a known money laundering syndicate. Then I turned my attention to Mark. Mark ran a consulting firm. In reality, it was a way for him to hide his gambling debts and failed investments. I accessed his business cloud. It was pathetic. He hadn't even changed his password since I set it up for him 2 years ago. I spent the next 45 minutes planting the seeds. I uploaded a series of encrypted files to his server. If the authorities ever searched his computer, they wouldn't find his failed spreadsheets. They would find what looked like a sophisticated ledger for an illegal sports betting ring. My heart should have been pounding, but it was steady. I felt like I was debugging a program. My marriage was the virus, and I was the antivirus. But then, I found the folder. It was hidden deep within Mark's personal backups. A folder titled Project X. I expected more financial fraud. I expected maybe photos of him and Sarah. What I found was a single audio file from a dashcam recording. The timestamp was from 2 years ago. The night of my father's funeral. No, the night of the asterisk accident asterisk. I pressed play. The sound was unmistakable. The crunch of gravel. The heavy thud of metal hitting something soft. And then the silence. A silence that lasted for 10 seconds before the voices started. Mark, stop. You hit him. Oh my God, Mark, stay in the car. Asterisk Sarah's voice. She sounded terrified, but not for the victim. For herself. Asterisk, shut up, Sarah. If we stop, we're done. I've been drinking, and you're in a stolen car. We have to go. Mark's voice was a jagged blade. Asterisk, but it looks like an old man. He's not moving. Asterisk. Asterisk. He's lived his life. If we stay, our lives are over. Drive. The sound of tires screeching followed. I fell back against the car seat, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My father wasn't killed by a random stranger. He was killed by my brother while my wife watched. They had sat at his funeral, holding my hands, watching me weep, knowing they were the ones who left him to die in a ditch like roadkill. The betrayal of the affair was a paper cut. This was an amputation. I looked at the cabin in the distance. The lights were on. They were inside. They were probably celebrating their freedom with a bottle of champagne. They thought they were starting a new chapter. I closed my laptop and tucked it into the passenger seat. I didn't need the bank accounts anymore. I didn't need the IRS. Those were just distractions. This was now about blood. They wanted to end our marriage on my birthday. Fine. I would give them a celebration they would never forget. I put the car in gear and drove toward the cabin. I didn't turn on my headlights. I knew the road by heart. I was the architect of this place, and I knew exactly how to make it a tomb. I parked the car nearly a mile away, deep in a cluster of overgrown hemlocks. I didn't want the sound of the door closing to carry through the crisp mountain air. The silence out here wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for the first strike. I walked the rest of the way on foot, sticking to the shadows of the trees. Every crunch of the frozen ground under my boots felt like a gunshot in my ears. My mind was a whirlwind of the audio file I'd just heard. Asterisk, he's lived his life. Mark's words looped in my brain, a jagged piece of glass cutting through my sanity. My father had taught Mark how to tie his shoes. He had taught him how to drive. And Mark had used those same skills to run him down and leave him in the mud. As the cabin came into view, I felt a strange sense of detachment. I had built this place with my own hands over 3 summers. I knew the grain of every cedar plank. I knew the exact weight of the front door. I had designed it to be a fortress of solitude, a place where the world couldn't reach us. How ironic that it was about to become a cage. I reached the perimeter. I could see them through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the great room. They were dancing. No music was playing loud enough for me to hear, but they were swaying, glasses of wine in hand. Sarah was wearing a silk robe I'd bought her for our anniversary. Mark was barefoot, looking more at home in my house than I ever had. I didn't feel the urge to burst in and scream. That's what a victim does. I moved toward the rear of the cabin, where the cellar door was hidden behind a stack of seasoned firewood. The basement was cold, smelling of damp earth and sawdust. In the center of the room sat a massive bolted steel crate. To anyone else, it looked like a heavy-duty generator or industrial storage. But inside was the nervous system of the house. When I built this cabin, I was obsessed with smart integration. I wanted to be able to control the temperature, the security, and the shutters from my office back in the city. But 3 weeks ago, after I first suspected the affair, I had upgraded the system. I didn't just want a smart home. I wanted a sentient one. I opened the crate. The hum of cooling fans filled the small room. I pulled out a tablet and synced it to the local server. My hands were perfectly still as I navigated through the custom scripts I'd written. I looked up at the ceiling. I could hear their footsteps directly above me. They were heading toward the kitchen. Is there any more of that scotch? Mark's voice was muffled but clear. In the cabinet above the fridge, babe, Sarah replied. Elias always kept the good stuff hidden for special occasions. I guess tonight qualifies. They laughed. A sharp, ugly sound that echoed in the floorboards. I tapped a command on the tablet. Asterisk, asterisk, sequence. Perimeter lock, asterisk, asterisk. High above me, in the walls of the cabin, heavy hydraulic pistons fired. The steel wildfire shutters, massive plates of reinforced metal, I'd told Sarah were for insurance purposes, slid down over every window and door. Asterisk, clang, 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 asterisk. The sound was deafening. The entire cabin shook. I heard Sarah scream. I heard a glass shatter on the hardwood floor. Mark, what was that? Mark, the windows. I don't know. The power must have tripped. Stay back. I wasn't done. I tapped the next command. Asterisk, asterisk, cellular jamming. Active asterisk, asterisk. The Wi-Fi signal on the tablet died. The cellular repeater I'd installed in the attic reversed its function. Now, instead of bringing the world in, it was drowning out every signal within a 5-mile radius. They could scream into their phones all night. No one was coming. I stood up and walked toward the stairs leading to the main floor. In my hand, I gripped the tablet like a weapon. I had spent years being the man who provided, the man who protected, the man who stayed quiet so others could shine. But as I placed my foot on the first step, that man died. Happy birthday to me, I whispered into the dark. I reached the door at the top of the stairs. It was a heavy oak door, and it was locked from my side. I could hear them on the other side, breathing hard, fumbling in the dark. Mark, I can't get a signal. My phone is dead. Sarah was sobbing now. The confidence she had at the dinner table was gone, replaced by the primal fear of a trapped animal. The door won't budge. It's like it's bolted from the outside. Elias. You don't think he's at home, Mark? He was sitting at the table like a pathetic loser when I left. He's probably still there crying. I smiled. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The red emergency lights in the hallway cast long, jagged shadows across the room. I stood in the doorway, framed by the crimson glow. "I finished my cake, Sarah," I said. "And now I've come for the presents." They both froze. The silence that followed was so thick I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Mark dropped the heavy flashlight he was holding. It hit the floor with a thud, rolling toward my feet. "Elias!" Mark's voice cracked. "Man, listen. You're taking this too far. We were going to tell you, eventually." "Tell me what, Mark?" I stepped into the room. "That you're a thief? A traitor? Or that you're a murderer?" The word murderer hung in the air like a noose. "Don't know what you're talking about," Mark stammered, but he took a step back, bumping into the kitchen island. "I think you do," I said, raising the tablet. I tapped a button, and the house speakers hidden in the ceiling began to hiss. Then the audio file started. "Mark, stop. You hit him." "Oh my God, Mark, stay in the car." The sound of my father's death filled the room, amplified to a deafening volume. Sarah covered her ears, screaming for it to stop. Mark looked like he was about to vomit. "This is my birthday present to you both," I said over the sound of the screeching tires on the recording. "The truth. And the truth is going to stay in this house until I decide otherwise." I looked at my watch. It was 1:15 a.m. The night was just beginning. The recording of the screeching tires finally cut to a sharp, static silence. The only sound left in the cabin was the ragged breathing of two people who had just realized their deepest, darkest sin was no longer a secret. "Elias, please," Sarah whispered. She was huddled against the kitchen counter, her silk robe stained with the wine from the glass she'd dropped. "We were scared. We were young. We didn't know what to do." "You knew how to drive away," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the rage I thought I would feel. Instead, there was just a cold, analytical vacuum. "You knew how to lie to me for 730 days. You knew how to sit at my dinner table and eat the food I bought while my father's blood was still on your hands." Mark tried to find his spine. He straightened his shoulders, but his hands were shaking so violently he had to shove them into his pockets. "Okay, fine. You found out. What now, Elias? You going to kill us? You think you've got the stomach for that?" I walked toward the fireplace. I picked up the heavy iron poker and began to stir the cold ashes. "Kill you? No, Mark, death is a release. Death is what my father got. He didn't have to live with the memory of his son leaving him to die. But you're going to live with everything." I tapped a command on the tablet. The large television above the mantel flickered to life. It wasn't showing a movie. It was showing a digital dashboard, a live feed of Mark's business accounts, his personal emails, and Sarah's private cloud. "While you two were celebrating your new life on the drive up here," I said. Pointing at the screen, I was busy. "Mark, do you recognize those transactions?" I zoomed in on a series of wire transfers. Thousands of dollars moving toward accounts flagged by the Treasury Department. I didn't do that," Mark stammered, stepping closer to the screen. "That's my company's EIN, but I've never seen those offshore accounts." "I know you didn't," I replied. "I did, using the remote access you so graciously gave me last year. By tomorrow morning, the FBI won't just be looking for a guy who cheated on his brother. They'll be looking for the architect of a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation. You're not just a hit-and-run driver anymore, Mark. You're a federal target." Sarah looked at Mark, then at me. Her loyalty was already shifting. I could see the gears turning in her head, the survival instinct of a predator who realized the pack leader had changed. "Elias, I can help you," she said, her voice turning soft, manipulative. "I have proof that Mark was the one driving. I have notes. I have texts. I'll tell the police everything. Just let me out of here, please. I never wanted to hurt you." Mark looked up, his eyes wide with a new kind of betrayal. "Sarah, what are you saying? It was your car. You told me to keep driving. You were drunk, Mark. You forced me to stay quiet." They began to scream at each other. It was a beautiful, chaotic symphony. I stood there, leaning against the mantel, watching the people I loved most in the world tear each other apart for a chance at a shorter prison sentence. "Stop," I said. They didn't hear me. I said stop. The room went silent. "Neither of you is going anywhere yet," I said. "We have one more birthday tradition to get through." I reached into the pocket of my coat and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. Sarah's eyes went wide. It was her diary, the one she thought she had hidden under the floorboards of our bedroom back home. You wrote about him in here, Sarah, not just the affair. You wrote about how you hated my predictability, how you hated the way I breathed when I slept. You wrote that you wished I had been the one in the road that night instead of my father. The words were poison. Hearing them read aloud in the red light of the cabin made them feel like a curse. As I read, I could see the light in Sarah's eyes go out. She knew there was no coming back from this. No apology, no manipulation, no "I love you" would ever bridge this gap. You wanted a life of excitement, Sarah, I said, closing the book. You wanted a man who took risks. Well, Mark took a risk tonight. He took the risk of coming here. I looked at Mark. And you. You took the risk of thinking I was weak because I was kind. I walked over to the front door, the one sealed by a 3-inch steel plate. I held up the tablet. The police are already on their way, I said, but not for a domestic dispute. I called in an anonymous tip about a domestic terrorist holdup in these mountains. I told them there were explosives. I told them you were armed. You're insane, Mark yelled, lunging toward me. I didn't move. I didn't have to. I tapped a button on the tablet. A high-pitched, piercing alarm began to blare from the house speakers. It was a sound designed to disorient, to cause physical pain. Mark doubled over, clutching his ears. Sarah fell to the floor, sobbing. You have 10 minutes before the SWAT team arrives, I said over the roar of the siren. 10 minutes to decide how you're going to explain the money laundering, the hit-and-run evidence I've conveniently placed in Mark's trunk, and why you've trapped me in my own home. Trapped you, Sarah screamed. Look at the cameras, Sarah. I pointed to the small security monitor on the wall. It showed the exterior of the cabin, but it didn't show me. It showed the steel shutters locked from the asterisk inside asterisk. It showed Mark holding the iron poker I had just set down. To the world, I said, I am the victim of a kidnapping. My brother and my wife lost their minds when I confronted them about their crimes. They locked me in. They threatened me. I picked up the iron poker and handed it to Mark. Go ahead, Mark. Hit me. Give the police a reason to believe you're the monster. I'm telling them you are. The choice was simple. Surrender to the truth, or embrace the lie I had built for them. Hit me, Mark, I whispered. Do it for Dad. The world didn't go dark all at once. It shattered. I felt the cold bite of the iron poker against my temple. A dull thud that vibrated through my skull and down into my teeth. I hit the floor before I even heard the sound of my own body collapsing. The taste of copper filled my mouth, the metallic tong of blood and betrayal. What did you do? Sarah's voice sounded like it was underwater. Mark, what have you done? He told me to! Mark screamed, but the bravado was gone. He looked down at the poker as if it were a snake that had just bitten him. He dropped it. It clattered onto the hardwood, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I lay there staring at the dust motes dancing in the red emergency light. My vision was swimming, but I forced myself to stay conscious. I needed to see the end. I had spent my whole life being the person who looked away. The person who made things easy for others. Not tonight. Tonight I was the witness to their extinction. The sirens were no longer a distant hum. They were a roar, a physical force shaking the walls of the cabin. Blue and red lights began to pulse through the tiny gaps in the steel shutters, creating a strobe effect that turned the room into a nightmare disco. Open the door, Elias. Mark was on his knees now, shaking me. Open the damn shutters. Tell them it was an accident. Tell them you tripped. I looked up at him. I pulled a tooth out of my mouth and spat it onto the rug. I didn't say a word. I just smiled. It was the most honest thing I had ever given him. Outside, a distorted voice boomed through a megaphone. Asterisk, this is the state police. We have the perimeter secured. Come out with your hands visible. Asterisk. We're trapped, Sarah moaned. She was crawling toward the corner of the room, trying to hide behind a sofa I had picked out for her 31st birthday. We're going to die in here. No, Sarah, I croaked, my voice thick with blood. You're going to live. For a very, very long time. In a very small room. I tapped the final command on the tablet I had kept clutched to my chest. Asterisk, asterisk sequence. Terminate, asterisk, asterisk. The steel shutters didn't just slide up. They retracted with a violent hiss of air. The front door's electronic bolts disengaged with a series of loud clicks. The cabin was suddenly flooded with the blinding white light of police searchlights. Get down, hands up, drop the weapon. I didn't watch them get tackled. I didn't watch the zip ties cut into their wrists. I kept my eyes on the ceiling. I listened to Sarah's hysterical screaming and Mark's pathetic attempts to explain a crime that had too many layers for a simple policeman to understand. I felt hands on me, gentle, professional hands. A paramedic was leaning over me, shining a light in my eyes. Sir, can you hear me? You're safe now. We've got you. Safe. It was a funny word. I spent 3 days in the hospital. The doctors called it a miraculous recovery, though I'd have a scar on my temple for the rest of my life. My lawyer sat by my bed every day reading the headlines. It was a media circus. Asterisk. The betrayed architect. Asterisk. Asterisk. The brother's blood money. Asterisk. Asterisk. The wife's secret diary. Asterisk. The FBI had found the offshore accounts. The local police had found the dashcam footage I'd planted on the USB drive in Mark's pocket. And the forensic team had found Sarah's diary, which painted a picture of a woman so cold she made the mountain winter look like a summer breeze. They were both being held without bail. The hit-and-run charges were just the beginning. The money laundering and the kidnapping of a distraught spouse ensured they would never see the sun as free people again. On the day I was discharged, I drove back to the house. Not the cabin. I'd already signed the papers to have that demolished. I drove back to the house where I blew out the candle. I walked into the kitchen. The cake was still there. It was a moldy grey ruin now. The happy birthday icing had turned into a black sludge. I picked up a fork and took a single bite. It was bitter. It was disgusting. I swallowed it anyway. I sat at the table and opened my laptop. I had one final task. I accessed the Lunith Thales server I'd been building in secret. I uploaded a new file. A story of a man who was pushed too far. A story of a man who realized that love is a luxury, but justice is a necessity. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. I looked at the scar. I looked at the man Sarah called